Goedemorgen. Welkom op de conferentie. Ja? Mijn naam is Shawn Wildermuth. Oh wait, I'm sorry. I don't know Dutch. Klein beetje. So today I want to talk about getting old. We had all this, yay, AI before, and I'm going to bring the house really down. Hopefully not. Hopefully not. I recently moved to the Netherlands, to Den Haag, and I'm an instructor, consultant, blah, 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 blah. You don't really need to know that much about me, except that when I started, I was sort of a geek directly out of the womb. You know, this is an embarrassing photo that, for some reason, I really like to show people. If you're noticing the Star Wars, I got Zork 1, soda, and a Commodore 64. Like, had all the accoutrements. That mention of the Commodore 64 is always the test to see who's old. So you all passed. So what's interesting, I think, about being in this business is that when I started with my first computer, a VIC-20, I became enamored with the programming immediately. You know, I ended up doing the same sort of programming that I think most people did when they were kids, make a D&D character sheet generator. You know, I think that's the first. That's the real hello world if you're someone about my age. And what I found interesting almost immediately is how much I was fascinated by the problem. I could type things in and things would happen. And that sort of started my accidental career. When I was 16, I started my first programming job, really not knowing anything. I remember having a conversation about, what do you mean you have to store data in a database? I can just put it in lines of BASIC at the end of the program. Like, I just couldn't conceive of any of these things. And so I haven't had a plan to my career. It's just sort of accidentally happened. I fell into the right situation sometimes, the wrong situations a bunch of times. I find it interesting, my only Wikipedia references are to dead technologies that I should have never bet in. So that's always a nice glimmer. WinFS, anybody? Oslo? That's correct. So in that first job, I started to really invest in what I could look like over the years, like what I actually cared about in software. Because early on, all I was really invested in was to get through to the end of the week without them figuring out that I didn't know what I was doing. They hired me at 16. They knew I didn't know what I was doing, but that took me a long time to get over. That, you know, maybe I didn't. Many of you probably went to college. I did. I went to college for 15 months. They called it dropping out, but I was clearly finished. But I'd been working so long that I felt like I was learning so much on the job. And what happened is that I wanted to do this thing. I wanted to be this person in software that could figure out problems, because the problem was the itch. I really didn't like writing the code. I just wanted to figure out the problem. And that's, you know, that might explain my career better than anything, in that I needed that hit of, oh, that's how we do it. Oh, that's how it works. But that doesn't mean that that's the way that most careers need to go. And we're talking about aging and development, not just about kind of where I come from, but I wanted you to have a base of what I care about. So I really think that as I started to work in real development teams, that I really thought I would always be a developer. I'd always be writing code. production code, not demo code, not teaching code, but actual development code, because that's really all I knew at the moment. And what I find interesting about that part of the life is that as developers, we're often asked, what should we do as our career changes, right? There's usually a fork in the road of a lot of careers. Do you want to become a lead and maybe eventually a manager? Do you want to sort of become an architect that helps build large systems? Or do you want to stay in the code? And I still think to somewhat, that I want to stay in the code. For me, mentoring, coaching, and leading has always been the most beneficial, seeing what code I could get out of a group of people, not just out of my computer. And I had some very good development leads coming up that taught me that you should lead by example. I went from the horrific code that I wrote on Commodore machines to decent code later because I started working for a guy whose code was immaculate. It was beautiful, understandable, direct, and so he never had to tell me to clean up my code. I wanted to be what I saw in other people's code base. In the time of GitHub, this becomes even more important because people might actually see my code that don't even work with me, that aren't willing to give me the benefit of the doubt. But management still is something I sort of dabbled in, and I think that's one of the questions that a lot of developers, as they age in this business, need to figure out. Do you want to separate yourself from the code but have a career path, especially if you're in sort of corporate environments? That's kind of where a lot of times this is led. You take your best developers and you take code out of their hands for some reason to try to manage teams. I never liked managing not just because of the code, but because I wanted to mentor and teach people I worked with, not approve vacations and give them their yearly review. I really hated that part, which is why I wasn't very good at it, frankly. And so as you continue in your career, you really have to either figure out or have a plan or just go, I'm having fun right now and continuing. My career has pretty much been made in 15-year blocks. So I was purely a dev early in my career. I fell into teaching in sort of my second 15 years. And now I'm about to enter that third 15-year block. You know, people think that at 70 I should retire. I'm not going to retire. I don't know what that looks like. My wife certainly would not be happy if I retired because me with nothing to do is her big, big fear in life. But I have to figure out what that next thing is. And I feel like preparing yourself with, this isn't going to be my day-to-day job forever, is probably a good idea. To understand that there's going to be phases. And you're going to try to figure out what you enjoy, right? Again, for some people, that's architecture. For me, it was teaching because I realized that in mentoring, that I loved watching the eyes, have that epiphany moment when I was showing them something. That really drove me, and drove me to a place where I was enamored with the problem, with the trick of teaching. That I wasn't just going to lay out facts, that I was going to actually have a story that took someone from beginning to end, so that they could really see what's happening. And so that was my last 15 years. Training's changed, teaching's changed, and I've changed. And so I think at this point in my career, I wanted to, okay, what's next? Do I go work for a big company? Do I escape the United States and move to Den Haag? You can probably guess which I picked. What is that next thing? Because what's interesting to me is I sort of dabbled in, maybe I should get a job, and everything had changed. I started my company in 2007 in the States, so I haven't had a job in a long time. Probably worked more for myself than I would have for, work-life balance is not my strong suit. And when I started to look out there, send out resumes, I realized that there were a bunch of things that weren't working. One is, I started to have doubts about my cognitive ability. I'm only 55, but when I would have to look up the same syntax 14 times in a row, I thought, is this me or is this normal? I think it's mostly normal. I actually got tested and I'm fine, but those doubts come in. Am I up to the job of writing code every day and figuring this out? And what I didn't expect was age bias. I should have expected it, but it sort of surprised me. Sending in resumes would get often returned right away because a 25-year-old, I was competing with 25-year-olds, and there's, in our industry, at least in the United States, I suspect a little bit here, there's an expectation that it's a young man's game or a young person's game. Apologize for that. That's probably more true, that people think it's a young man's game, but let's not delve into that. That's a whole different keynote I'll do next year. And so what happened was I had to really figure out how I was going to deal with the age bias, because I wasn't going to be able to compete on resume. I'm pretty well known. I've done a lot of things, but that doesn't really equate because humans aren't watching resumes anymore, right? There's these automated systems that are trying to take your resume and hone it down by keywords, pretty much what recruiters used to do, to try to figure out whether you're a good fit or not. And it is the worst way to hire people. It really, you're missing so many people. What I didn't know at the time was, you're supposed to have a bunch of resumes, one tailored to each job. So just submitting to companies ended up being like a full-time job. And there's this whole arms war, the automatic resume scanners versus the apps that will scan your resume and tell you how to fix it so that it'll get through the resume scanners, and they sort of go back and forth. And it doesn't feel like anyone's winning. And at the same time, in the last 3 or 5 years, there are fewer development jobs. Whether that's, it's dependent on industry certainly, but Microsoft has had a hiring freeze until I think 2 months ago, and Amazon and Facebook, and most of those I didn't want to work for. I would have worked for Microsoft, but not Amazon or Facebook. But it seemed to percolate out into all different sort of industries, that we just have fewer jobs than we did before. Come on. So I like to think of the fact that I like to be a dev. I'll enjoy that work a lot. And it got me thinking too, how do you stay a dev? If you don't want to go up through management, how do you stay a dev? And I really feel like there's 3 ways to do it. What I've kind of latched onto is I try to learn everything that's new and shiny. It's exhausting, but I enjoy it, right? Another way you can do it is to specialize. Okay, I'm going to know this language, this system, really, really well. I did a Fox Pro user group a few years ago, and they are some of the most happy work-life balance people I'd ever met. They've been doing the same technology for a long time. Lots of our companies still run on them. We won't talk about the people that are running just on Excel, but it's sort of the same problem. Do you want to specialize in some tech? I used to get asked quite a lot, I want to make a lot of money in this business. How do I make a lot of money? And I would first say, you're probably already making way more than you deserve. But I'll talk about, if anyone wants to meet me for coffee afterwards, I'll explain my, there's nothing worse than a lazy developer story, because it makes me very angry. Of course, I lost where I was. Yeah, so the way I would tell them is to learn mumps. Anyone know mumps? Oh, a couple people. Yeah, it was developed in 1968, and all the mumps developers were dying. But they made $300,000, $400,000 a year because there were a handful of people that knew mumps and were willing to do mumps. And most of the hospitals in the United States run on mumps today, still, which is just amazing. And so that is a path you can take. You can take that path of let's go ahead and specialize what I care about. I'm going to get to know something very deeply, but I'm not going to have much breadth in different technologies. And there's nothing wrong with that. The other is to focus on a vertical. I see a lot of developers who end up being really great developers because they care about an industry. They may have been in real estate companies for the last 20 years. They may have been in insurance, whatever it is. But knowing the domain knowledge becomes way more important than the technical knowledge, right? Understanding how a mortgage gets approved, underwritten, and the money gets sent to somebody is a hard set of data. And knowing that you can pretty much in any language go, if approved, then, that part's in some ways the easiest part. The problem is this first kind of developer, the one that sort of stays bleeding edge, is thought of as better developers than the rest of us. And it's simply wrong. Needing to work at night, honing and learning the new JavaScript framework, learning Blazor, whatever it is to stay ahead of the curve so you know what you're going to work in your next job, is something that hasn't worked for me, A big reason I don't have kids is because I've been workaholic most of my life. Like, I couldn't imagine being a bad father because I couldn't push my way from the computer. And those are real repercussions of our business. If we're being encouraged to be the 10x developer, the superstar developer, you can't all be superstar developers, and I would rather have 5 average developers that weren't arrogant than one superstar. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work for me. And so if you are on a path of staying with a particular technology, staying with a vertical market, a domain knowledge, I really want to dissuade you that is not a worse job. We sort of do the same thing with languages as well. C# is better than VB, is better than PHP, is better than Perl, and I think it's all bullshit. And I've been guilty of it before. If you go back Twitter long enough, I'm sure I've said the wrong thing. But it's just code. It all ends up being machine code at some point. And so it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Where did that go? There we go. So looking into the future, I have to think about where do I want to be in the next 15 years? And I think that's kind of what I wanted to, I wish I had that when I was a 20-year-old developer or 35-year-old developer or 50-year-old developer, that, this isn't going to last forever. Because one of the things I have learned is when it starts leaving, I end up losing fingernails because I'm grabbing on so hard that I would just let go, I would fall into whatever that next thing is. This pressure to know exactly what your plan is. I'm going to be at this job, and if I don't get promoted to lead, I'm going to leave, find a better job with more money, and then if I don't get promoted to manager, I'll leave again, ... I think being too rigid is going to be a problem there, but have a plan, If you're working for a company you love, that is a really lucky place to be in. And for me, the problem was never the technology. I would be at a company, and I would leave because of the company, not because of the technology. Often that was, I had a reputation early in my career, in my 30s, where if I left a company, they were going to do a mass layoff at some point. And it wasn't because I left, but you can sort of smell it in the air that I just didn't want to be part of a mass layoff. We got the product done, let's get rid of all the domain knowledge we have and fire everybody. I don't think it happens as much, but it used to be really the case. So if you decide, if you're in the position that I'm in, that you're middle career, end career, whatever you want to talk about it, try to remember that what you're bringing to the table isn't React, Blazor, SQL Server. What you're bringing is a history of coding knowledge, of solving problems. 5, 2, I will wrap it up then. You guys have been sitting in the heat way too long anyway. Is that you're bringing a wealth of knowledge of how to go from point A to point B, and how you've been down roads that had dead ends, and you're bringing that experience with you. That's why I think the scanning of resumes is not useful, because most of the things that I'm known for and are good at aren't on the resume. They're in between the lines of the resume. You know, that I know how to work within a team and not make people angry. That I have to tell everyone in the team that I'm going to growl and curse when I code, but that's a whole nother story. I'll also tell you over coffee if you want. And that whether you think you want a job for your career, you want to be a consultant, you want to go from contract to contract because you like the change, none of those are better or worse. But know where you're going. You know, you don't have full control over your career, but you do have control over what direction you're facing, right? You're never going to know, oh, I really want a job there, or I want to be in this role here. You might be surprised by what is going to be available to you that you didn't think of. So again, have a direction, but be really willing to change. If I had not had the opportunity to teach, I would have never taught. Like someone came to me and went, have you thought about? No, I've never thought about that. And that was, some of the best things I've had in my career. So thank you for coming. There's my QR code. I'm a very obedient speaker. Dankjewel. Goedemorgen.